With both Sunderland and Leeds getting off to fantastic starts in the Premier League, the question has now become, could we see one of or two of the more established Premier League teams get relegated this season and really shake the apple cart of football and the football pyramid? So we're going to talk about that in this video. Please let me know who you think is going to be relegated this season in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this content, but let's dive into it. Let's look at potential relegation candidates. And I know on this channel we do check in with the relegation battle, but to be honest, I think it's one of the most fascinating things in the Premier League. In the last few years, we have not had much of a battle because the newly promoted teams have really struggled. But this year, Sunderland and Leeds seem to have a different air about them. And Burnley as well, you can't count them out. They've had a pretty horrific fixture list to start the season, so we'll start to see them sort of maybe flex their muscles over the next few weeks when they have more winnable games coming up. But let's go through the current bottom half of the table, and in there we have Wolves, West Ham, Burnley, Forest, Villa, Newcastle, Man United, Brentford, Everton, Leeds and Fulham. And also we should include in there as well Sunderland are currently in 5th place on 11 points, but you would expect them to be in the bottom half this season if they follow the traditions of being a newly promoted team. And just to add to that, no team has ever been relegated in Premier League history from the position that Sunderland are in right now. They've got 11 points from their opening 6 games of the season, so that is worth bearing in mind. So when we go through what Opta are saying, the fact is that a lot of the sort of predictions around Sunderland are to do with the fact they're a newly promoted team and aren't actually to do with what they are doing on the pitch right now. They of course won at the weekend against Nottingham Forest in what was a massive win at the bottom of the table, and really sort of showed how strong a team Sunderland could be this season. But we are going to put them in that conversation. Leeds as well, they've got 8 points from their opening 6 games. They picked up a really good point against Bournemouth at the weekend. They'll be devastated that they sort of, I don't want to say threw it away, but they conceded a late goal, and they have dropped 3 points this season from, late goals. They dropped a late goal against Fulham, which cost them a point, and then of course they've dropped 2 this weekend against Bournemouth from conceding late on. So that maybe is a cause of concern for Leeds, but I think overall it looks like they have adjusted pretty well to life in the Premier League. And just to go through their odds, Opta has Sunderland and Leeds at both a roughly 28% chance of going down this season, which I think is interesting because Sunderland, not too long, at the start of the season, Sunderland were ranked as the highest, the most likely to get relegated, and they've already took their odds down to 28%, which means that basically in 3/4 of Opta's simulations, they have a chance of staying up, and the same with Leeds. So I thought that was particularly interesting. So let's look at who Opta has as the leading candidates. And Wolves are currently at a 60% chance of relegation. But if you saw them at the weekend, there were positive signs for them against Tottenham. They probably should have won that game, and they'll be gutted that they didn't. West Ham have a 45% chance of relegation, but they've just hired Nuno Espirito Santo. And if you watch this channel, you will know that I'm a big fan of him, and I think that he will get West Ham ticking in the right direction. You've got Burnley, who are listed at 62%, but I think their fixture list has been so horrific. It's really hard to judge them. They have played so far this season Liverpool, they have played Man City, they've played Man United away, they've played Tottenham away. So they've had 4 games which they probably didn't expect to pick up points, and they got 4 points from their home games against Sunderland and Nottingham Forest. So I think there has to be context applied to Burnley in that we don't actually know what they are going to be this season because their fixtures have been pretty cruel so far. Let's look at some of the other teams who are, listed as having a chance or a slight chance. Forest have got a 22% chance of relegation. That's pretty high for a team that obviously was challenging for Champions League last season, but you watch them recently under Ange, and the change they've had from Nuno and the upheaval in that department, it doesn't surprise me to see them ranked so closely to Sunderland and Leeds. Villa and Newcastle are both given like a 2 to 3% chance, so it's very unlikely. And look, the eye test would tell you it is very unlikely. Newcastle, have had a bit of a stuttering start of the season, but there is absolutely no way they'll be getting relegated, and there's absolutely no way that Aston Villa will be in that conversation. And then we start getting to the teams that have got 10% and down. We've got Man United, who have a 10% chance of relegation, and anyone who watched them at the weekend would be concerned. I don't think anybody's willing to throw them in as relegation candidates because it just feels mad to have that conversation with Man United. But if you look how bad they've been under Ruben Amorim, they've been in relegation form since he took the job, and they played against Brentford at the weekend, a team that are possibly a relegation candidate, and they looked like the second best team on the pitch that day. So how can we sit here and say that Man United aren't in the conversation when your eyes are telling you that they possibly are? They're 2 wins this season. One was a pretty controversial win against Burnley, and they scored in the last minute of the game. The other was against Chelsea, who were down to 10 men for pretty much all the game because they got an early red card. And I think with Man United, they've got Sunderland this weekend, and that feels like a significant game for them. Because if they were to lose that game, then the chatter around them being potential relegation candidates is only going to amplify. And look, it's early in the season. Man United could make a change. They could bring in a new manager. They could probably finish, still in the top 8 if things are right for them this season. But as we sit here right now in the situation they're in, I think we have to be honest and say that there has to be a conversation about Man United being potential candidates. And look, Opta has them in at 10%, which is probably like 6th or 7th favourites to get relegated this season. So you have to put them in there. We've got Brentford at 8%, Everton at 6%, Fulham at 8% as well. So it feels unlikely they'll be drawn in. And look, I think Everton have got such a good attack. I don't see them being anywhere near the battle. I think Fulham are strong. They're good at home as well. I don't see them being in there. Brentford, maybe, you've got the mitigating factors of their head coach, who's new to the game, but they seem to be doing okay right now. Look, they don't look as good as they did last season, but with the upheaval they've had, it felt unlikely that would be the case. But I think Brentford maybe have a slight concern, maybe, but, they've been good at home. They've got 7 points at home this season, so you don't want to write them off. But let's look at the teams that Opta are projecting for relegation, because the bottom 3, as they view it, is most likely to be West Ham, Wolves and Burnley. But I don't think that this is necessarily going to be the case, because West Ham bringing in Nuno, that is a game changer for them. They've not brought in Nuno with like 10 games to play and he doesn't have time to implement his style. He's got a lot of runway with this West Ham team to get them playing in the right way. And they've got a really strong team. To look at this West Ham team on paper and say it's going to be a relegation candidate, I think you'd be wrong. They've got so much quality in there. And now bringing in Nuno, who's going to be more pragmatic, who's going to be less of a risk taker, so to speak, than Graham Potter. It seems like just a general better fit for this West Ham group. I think it's really hard to envisage Nuno putting West Ham in a position where they get relegated. And I think West Ham will begin to climb that league table. Wolves, I think it's really hard because of how bad their start has been. And also they've given their manager a new contract and they're going to change that. It's going to be hard to imagine them really being able to make that points difference up to, Sunderland. They're 10 points behind Sunderland right now at this early stage. And look, you can't make that up with a good couple of months, but it's going to be a long slog for them to get ahead of Sunderland. And it relies on Sunderland to have a really, really bad run of games. So Wolves, I'm a bit more concerned about, and I think there are issues. It doesn't feel like a happy place, Wolves, at the moment. And I think that they probably will be in and around this conversation. And I think Burnley as well, I think they're hard to predict. I think, we talked about how difficult their fixtures have been so far this season. And, they've got Wolves coming up. And I think Wolves have got Burnley and Sunderland coming up in sort of the next 3 or 4 games. So it's going to be really, really telling how those fixtures go. And that'll probably give us an indication of where these teams are. But I think Burnley, to me, are the only team in the Premier League that we really don't know what they are, because their fixture list has not been great. When they come up against teams, they've got Aston Villa coming up and they've got Wolves to play as well in the next 2, I think it says roughly 2 of the next 3 games are them. That's going to tell us a lot more about where this Burnley team is, not so much what they've done so far this season. Because even the games they've lost, look, that 5-1 defeat at the weekend for them, it wasn't a 5-1 game. They conceded 2 goals really late on. They were pretty much in it. They had a chance to take the lead at one point. They were okay against Tottenham on the opening day, sort of done in an unfortunate fashion to lose that one 3-0. Liverpool, they probably could have got a point. Man United, they probably could have got a point. They beat Sunderland, who's a team that's going to be down there. They got a good draw against Nottingham Forest. So there has to be context applied to Burnley. I don't think Burnley are a shoo-in for relegation this season, even though a lot of the pundits would have you think that right now. And I think really to top this video off, could we see a shock relegation? And look, the only reason that Opta has Sunderland as 4th and 5th favourites for the drop this season is because they are newly promoted teams. But I think anyone with eyes who is watching the Premier League would look at those 2 teams right now and say they are not the 4th and 5th worst teams in the Premier League. Certainly, Sunderland look far better than that. They look like they are defensively strong. They look like they've got a manager who knows what he's doing. And I think Leeds have really taken to the Premier League very well as well. So my eyes are telling me that those teams are better than that and that they can, have a really good chance of finishing maybe sort of in that 13th to 10th bracket if things go right for them this season. And I think as well, Opta has a lot of teams around that 5 to 10% mark at the moment. And I think that comes from the fact that they are still banking on Sunderland and Leeds being newly promoted teams, which means that they will struggle and drop points, which is fair enough. But as Sunderland and Leeds, if they do pick up points this season and continue to have strong starts this season, their percentages will dwindle, which will increase those teams around the 5 to 10% mark and give them more things to worry about. And look, I am not saying right now that Sunderland and Leeds are going to stay up. You know, we don't know that, and we're only 6 games into the season, and a lot can happen. They can both lose 6 games in a row. It happens in the Premier League. But what I am saying is right now, as a Premier League watcher, my eyes are telling me that Sunderland and Leeds are not going to be relegated this season. And that for means is teams like Nottingham Forest, who are struggling, teams like West Ham, who you wouldn't expect to be down there, teams like, Man United and Brentford, they are going to have problems this season because ultimately 3 teams have to get relegated. And that is what is very, very interesting to me, because last season the newly promoted teams were so bad that there was no concerns for the established 17 Premier League teams. And that should make this a very exciting relegation battle, because I think there's going to be teams down there that we really did not expect at the start of the season, because everyone had pretty much said that at least 2 of the newly promoted teams will go down. A lot of people just expected all 3 to, but from what we've seen at the start of the season, I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case. So my sort of verdict on this is, if I was a Nottingham Forest, a Brentford, a Fulham fan, or even a Manchester United fan right now, I'd be very worried about the strength of Sunderland and Leeds, and I'd be very worried about the fact that these 2 teams don't look like they're here to just make up the numbers like years past. And if both of them can continue to show their strong starts and, move closer to that 40-point mark, that means we will see one of these established Premier League teams who have ambitions to be challenging for European places potentially be in a relegation battle. And that means we're going to have a fascinating, fantastic scrap that's going to be brilliant for neutral fans, because I struggle to pick 3 teams to get relegated this season. I look at the Premier League right now and I don't know who is potentially going down, and I think that makes this very, very exciting. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Who do you think is going to get relegated this season? And please like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this sort of content. We'll catch you for another video very soon.